Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Greenwood, and on behalf of the MGAA, I'd like to welcome you to this training session this afternoon, which is being delivered by CRIF Decision Solutions Ltd. Before handing over to our presenter, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points. I need to advise you that this session is being recorded. Can you please ensure your microphone and camera are switched off? If anyone would like to ask a question, can you please use the chat button at the bottom of your screen? Your questions will be answered during the Q&A session and will remain anonymous. However, if we do not have time to answer these, they may be addressed post-event should you provide your contact details. The MGAA's Programme of Learning and Insights has been accredited by the Chartered Insurance Institute for the quality of content and supporting materials, with CPD hours applicable if relevant to your ongoing professional development. The recording of this training will be available on our website and MGAA YouTube channel, with a PowerPoint presentation to follow post-event. Finally, I'll be posting a link to a feedback survey in the chat box. Please do take time to complete this, which should take no more than 2 minutes, as this allows us to deliver the best quality events to our members. So today's training is transforming ESG challenges into opportunities, enhancing profitability, it's easy for you to say, in commercial insurance, and it's being delivered by Mattia Bongini, Data Science Manager at CRIF. Mattia is a data science manager in CRIF's Global Transformation Services practice, where he helps clients integrate sustainability metrics into their strategic and regulatory reporting. His work focuses on key areas like the estimation of GHG emissions, transition risk, and biodiversity impact, supporting clients in meeting the standards for CSRD reporting, Pillar 3 disclosure, and climate stress testing. Mattia also guides organisations through climate scenario analyses, helping them understand and manage climate-related risks. Beyond sustainability, Mattia is deeply involved in developing risk-based pricing models, for the insurance sector. He has led projects on pricing sophistication for both consumer and commercial insurance, as well as on fraud prevention solutions and customer analytics. And so, Mattia, it's over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And so before delving into the contents of our session, let's review a little bit what are the learning objectives of this session. So at the end of the session, you delegates who are attending will should be able to first of all explain how to integrate a sustainability assessment into the commercial underwriting processes without involving the client in a tedious ESG questionnaire. Second objective is to be able to outline which ESG data and key indicators are accessible and how to determine their correlation with the insurance risk based on real case studies. Finally, you should be able to explain how to improve loss ratio by underwriting more sustainable and ESG compliant businesses. So let's start from the first bullet. So integrate a sustainability assessment into commercial underwriting. And I would like to start from a survey which together with the Insurance Post, CRIF has done with the insurance companies at the end of 2024 in order to understand how advanced they were in terms of the usage of ESG data. In this histogram, you see the responses to the question at the top. So how embedded are ESG data into the organization, product, and service development? The outcome is that insurance companies are at least, let's say, considering and embedding partially this kind of information. Only 17% roughly declare that they are wholly embedded, they wholly embed this kind of ESG data into their decision processes. And but if we look closely at what kind of data are used, we see that actually we are talking about the bread and butter of what is the business of insurance companies in terms of ESG data. That is physical risk assessment, caused by events like floods, storms, hurricanes, heat and cold waves, and so on. This is the kind of indicators that are at the moment the most widespread in terms of usage in the insurance sector. And this, of course, as I was saying, is no surprise, because this is where insurance companies can leverage their internal data in order to be at the forefront of risk-based pricing. The areas where insurance companies are a little bit lackluster in terms of adoption are ESG data, which are related to the so-called impact of companies to the environment, like carbon emission, external accreditation like ISO 14001, and so on. So let's say all those information which instead measure how adequate the behavior of companies is in terms of sustainability to the environment. And this is exactly the kind of information which on which insurance companies struggle more, even because let's say regulators like the FCA have added non-financial reporting obligations for UK companies in terms of providing this kind of data for their portfolios and their supply chain, like for instance the Transparency Supply Chain Provision Act. This has put a burden on insurance companies, especially the smaller one, on how to retrieve such data points, because it's absolutely not easy to retrieve them. Indeed, the kind of data points that are needed to assess, let's say, the sustainability of a company from the perspective of the insurance companies are twofold, and they follow the so-called double materiality assessment framework. In this framework, on one hand, there is the impact of the company on the environment and the society. So this kind of realm of indicators refer to the impact, let's say on the kind of impact the direct behavior of the company has. Like for instance, how much it emits, so greenhouse gases emission, how let's say how it treats its employees and the neighboring communities, and so on. Let's say the so-called inside-out behavior. On the other side, there is dependency, which refers mainly to physical risk, and it's the core area of insurance companies. And these instead estimate the so-called outside-in the outside-in framework for where environment and society impact each companies. As I was saying, on the dependency side, insurance companies are more at the forefront, let's say, of the including this kind of data into their decision processes. Where there is a lack of, at the moment, a lack of sophistication is on the impact side. And which is actually the focus of today's webinar, because the impact side is where we take a look at how the company behaves and see how it behaves as a corporate citizen in terms of sustainability. The problem with this kind of data, the impact data for companies, is that this kind of data are usually only available in, let's say, in sustainability reports. So they are published by very few large companies, and they are at group level, so not at single entity level. And so this leaves out a large chunk of companies, all the SMEs basically, which are not, let's say, forced to provide such information, and for which this kind of information can only be retrieved if we want them punctually through questionnaires. However, we know that let's say the filling of these questionnaires is very difficult, because at the moment there are no incentives for SMEs to fill out those questionnaires. So either the company, let's say, gives them an incentive, a monetary incentive, I mean, to fill them out, or the let's say the uptake of these questionnaires is very low. And moreover, they introduce much, let's say, frictions with brokers and other layers, let's say, in between layers, because they, let's say, increase the burden of, let's say, of interaction with directly with the customers. So there are several, let's say, disadvantages of the questionnaire approach. And moreover, the questionnaire approach has also another let's say, bottleneck in the sense that this kind of data are needed in real time, because if a company wants to embed this kind of data in pricing models, they need to be in real time, as the pricing takes place in real time. Questionnaires, so being, let's say, being very, let's say, filling a questionnaire is a very lengthy process, so it takes time, and so it's usually not possible to be able to embed this kind of data into the pricing model. So this leads us to rely on statistical data for this kind of information. Statistical data is available, ESG statistical data, I mean, but the issue is that there is a lack of a single coherent data source. So it's very difficult to find a single data source for all the kind of ESG dimensions that we want to estimate. And moreover, it's even more difficult to find a single data source which cover transnational portfolio, which means that large insurance groups face an additional, let's say, barrier into the, let's say, embedding of this kind of data, because if they rely on a data source at national level, this kind of data source may not be coherent with the data, an analogous data source in a different country where the group has operations. So it's very important to be able to have homogeneous data cross-border. So in order to, let's say, try to find a solution to this problem, we want to start from what we actually have at underwriting that can be used to retrieve the most relevant ESG information. Usually the kind of information that we have available at this stage are very few regarding the company. You find those in the let's say at the top of the slide. They are typically the registration number, if there is, because as you know, smaller companies in the UK don't have a registration number. Typically there is the SIC code, so the economic sector of activity, but not all companies usually have those. And typically the address of the headquarters is there. So these are, let's say, the typical set of information available. How we typically use this kind of information to retrieve, let's call it ESG information? So they are not properly ESG, but can in a certain way be linked with ESG behavior and data. For instance, the registration number can be used to retrieve business information from company's house, which they're not, of course, ESG information, but can be used to create ESG information, and we will see how. Or can be used to check the presence of the company inside third-party databases, which are connected to sustainability issues, like the health and safety database collecting all infringements on health and safety, for instance. So this is the source of most single name information regarding ESG data. The economic activity instead can be used to proxy sectoral ESG behavior and to benchmark, let's say, the behavior of the company with respect to its peers, its let's say, sectoral peers. And there are several databases which allow us to do that, like Axiobase, the Office for National Statistics, are just to mention a few. the address of the headquarters instead, as we all know, is mostly relevant for physical risk evaluation, which is outside, let's say, of today's picture, but it can still be used to check for geographical factors relating to the impact side of the sustainability behavior, like, for instance, the presence of natural areas and so on. Here, Copernicus, OpenStreetMap, and other open databases of this kind can help in getting this kind of information. Why I mention open databases? Open databases are actually the core of where we can find this kind of information. ESG information are usually inside open databases and can be collected if we take care of the data source by itself. For instance, here we just mention a few of these open databases which can be employed to find positive and negative information regarding the sustainability behavior of a company. For instance, in the modern slavery database, we can find documentation that companies have to submit regarding modern slavery to the UK government. And this means that there we can find statements regarding how the company tries to prevent modern slavery according to the Modern Slavery Act of 2015. So this is mainly positive information. Instead, we have negative information, which we can find in the health and safety data set, where there are all the breaches and infringements on, let's say, on health and safety, taking also into account the severity of the breach. So also giving, let's say, we can also assign a severity to the kind of negative information we can find. And then there are also transnational databases like the one of the Business and Human Rights Resource Center or the OECD databases, which contain allegations in terms of human rights and their eventual response, and instances of cases on breaches of OECD guidelines. So these are all negative information. Companies House is, let's say, not a source in a strict sense of positive or negative information, but it's a source of business information, and there are a lot of ESG information which we can derive from business information, because it is, let's say, for instance, let's take some examples which you can derive from a very simple information like the composition of the corporate board. From the composition of the corporate board, we can usually obtain KPIs, indicators like the average age of the board of directors. So as you understand, the higher the age of the board of directors, let's say, then it is worse for this kind of company to fare on governance indicators, because they usually it is a signal of less responsiveness, less energy, and less also adequacy in terms of sustainability. We can also derive the gender gap of the board, so the percentage of women sitting, of the members sitting in the board. We can derive the gender of the CEO, which is, let's say, an ancillary indicator to the one before, but on a relevant dimension, which is the CEO. We can also identify potential family ties among board members, and which are, let's say, detrimental in terms of resiliency of the management structure. The number of corporate officers, so how many board members are sitting there, and usually larger boards tend to be much more accountable with respect to what they do. And finally, the last indicator which you can derive in this example, it's a measure of locality. So how many board members live close to headquarters, which is a proxy of how close the company is to its let's say to its neighborhood, basically to the social tissue with which surrounds in which the company operates. These are just examples of ESG indicators that we can derive from business information, from punctual business information. Other ESG indicators can be obtained through the use of analytics applied to open statistical data. And this can take place without the need to interact directly with the company. This is very important because to stress, because one of the things that we were stressing before was the speed of the process. Of course, if we rely on open statistical data and analytics, we can estimate all this information without having any bottleneck in our process. Here we report again only some of the indicators which can be estimated through the use of analytics, like greenhouse gases emissions scope 1, 2, and 3, taking into account, for instance, the economic activity of the company, its size measured by revenues or employees, and where it operates. So with just those information, you can already set up models for estimating greenhouse gases emissions, which are also compliant with guidelines on carbon emission accountings provided by PCAF, for instance. But not only those, also indicators regarding the percentage of renewable energy, percentage of energy recovery, percentage of waste recycling activities, and so forth and so on. And this can be done also on social and governance indicators that we have seen before. So basically, with this kind of reliance on open statistical data and business information, which we can actually create a whole data lake of ESG indicators. So let's recap a little bit how all this process works. So at least in principle, okay? So we start back from the available data at underwriting, which typically are registration number or SIC code, and or, of course, you can have all of them, SIC code and address of the quarter. If you have the registration number, of course, you can check if the company is present inside third-party databases like health and safety, OECD, and so on. And you can fetch for business information inside company's house. If you don't have registration number, but you have SIC code or address of the quarter, you cannot do step 2 and 3, but you already have the necessary information to at least feed your analytics pipeline for the enrichment of analytical ESG indicators. And here, so we can obtain male, let's say the gender gap of managers, percentage of energy recovery, women versus men employment rate. So a lot of information which, let's say, which measure the sustainability of each company. And everything can be done in a very fast way, because we are never interacting with companies. So this kind of process, of course, like all processes, has its pros and its cons. Here we report, of course, the most relevant for, let's say, in our opinion. Let's start from the cons, because let's say these could be, let's say, the worst things that can happen, let's say, when considering this kind of how to apply those pipelines. Of course, as the first thing that we have mentioned is that several of these indicators will be statistical proxies of the ESG behavior of companies. This is, of course, not a cons per se, but it's, let's say, it's by design, basically. But these we will see in the pros. will have, let's say, will entail a specific advantage. The other cons are basically related to the costs of those pipeline, because of course you need to you need to make an initial investment for the creation of this pipeline and for the creation of the statistical models that must be built from scratch to estimate all those indicators. And you also of course end up internalizing the maintenance of such pipeline. So again, recurring costs that you have to consider on a yearly basis. And moreover, you need to internalize the competence of the handling of this kind of indicators. So vertical ESG modeling competencies to fine-tune all those models. However, when this pipeline is ready, there are pros which, in our opinion, outweigh the cons, because this kind of pipeline is, as you understand, very fast, because computation of indicators can be done basically in a matter of seconds with clever data management. There is no limitation regarding coverage, because besides, if let's say the underwriting data are available, we can compute all the indicators that we want. This kind of approach will inherit a sort of authoritative license, let's say, from if you rely on authoritative data sources and methodologies. So basically you will end up with indicators that have a pedigree from a modeling point of view and a authoritative point of view, let's say. And finally, and this is the most important thing in our let's say assessment, all these indicators will be statistically significant, because they are built in order to be able to cover as much population as possible, so the data can be employed to perform statistical analysis. And this brings us to the second point of our agenda, which is how we can measure the correlation of the ESG behavior, which we measure through the ESG indicators, which we have created thanks to our pipeline, with insurance risk. So we start now with our way to enrich ESG data. So we take for granted everything we have said in the previous slides. So now it's very easy for us, insurance company, to enrich our entire commercial portfolio, and we want to check whether ESG indicators are predictive of insurance risk. So what we do, there are usually, after data enrichment, there are usually two steps after this. First, there is the correlation analysis, of course, where for each line of business, because all this analysis is line of business dependent, and every line of business requires an ad hoc, let's say, process of this kind in order to capture the specificities of the portfolio of the insurance company. We can perform for each line of business a correlation analysis with the specific risk indicator which we want to consider, like the loss ratio, claims frequency, burning cost. It's up to you. And this kind of correlation analysis can be performed to create a short list of KPIs, of indicators. This short list is, let's say, the starting point, and is usually obtained through a combination of machine learning techniques and traditional methods, so random forest, Pearson correlation, and so on. With this, in this step, we also prune potential indicators which are correlated with each other. So we exclude multi-collinear variables right at this stage. The leftover variables, so those indicators which made up inside our short list of KPIs, will be further inspected in terms of their interpretation, because the point is ESG indicators have an interpretation. As you may understand, if I measure greenhouse gases emissions with an ESG indicator, this indicator should always mean the more greenhouse gases emission you have, the worse you are, because polluting a lot from an ESG perspective is bad. This evidence, so this interpretation, should be coherent with the correlation I am witnessing together with the risk indicators of choice. So if my greenhouse gases emission indicator should correlate positively with claim frequency, for instance, because I want to see that greenhouse gases emissions, a high level of greenhouse gases emission is associated with high level of claims of costs, so with bad people, okay? Because if this is not the case, then the KPIs are not working as intended, or cannot be considered for that specific line of business, because we cannot correlate the interpretation, the sustainability of a company with its insurance risk level. Luckily, it happens that this is true for several ESG indicators that we have, let's say, found in our experience, because here we report just a few of them. The most, let's say, the one that appear, let's say, more frequently in our let's say previous project experiences. It is more or less a given that if we isolate in a portfolio a portion made up of companies with low greenhouse gas scope 1 emission intensity, then this kind of portion usually has a loss ratio which is between minus 50% and minus 30% with respect to the portfolio average. So this is a portion of a portfolio, say a subset of companies, which is much less risky than the average portfolio. So we are able to determine that this kind of company are not only good from a sustainability point of view, but also good from an insurance risk point of view. The same is true for ISO certifications, the presence of ISO certification. The same is true for also social and governance indicators. Let's look at social indicators, for instance. We have seen that if a subset of companies associated with high spending for employees training is usually associated with a loss ratio reduction between minus 70% to minus 50% with respect to portfolio average, while instead the reliance on a high percentage of temporary workers means that this kind of subset of companies is riskier usually than the portfolio average, between plus 25% and plus 40%. So we have plenty of evidence that this kind of this holds true for indicators not only on the environmental side, but also on the social and governance side. And this is very good news, because it means that actually we can link profitability with sustainability in a nice, let's say, framework, which let's say will allow insurance companies to create a more sustainable portfolio without losing money. So, and how do we do that from this kind of evidences? This is the content of the last bullet. So how to improve loss ratio based on all the evidences that we have collected so far. Basically, we will be capitalizing on the correlation between the ESG indicators and loss ratio. Okay, so again, we have our short list of KPIs for the given line of business, which not only has a nice interpretation, but also has a nice correlation. So what we will do is to take all these KPIs and feed them inside a training pipeline to develop an array of models for further evaluation. Let's say to synthesize those KPIs into a single score, meshing them all together and extracting a nice trend, a nice overall trend. The best model will be selected by considering not only its predictive performance on a test set or a validation set, but also taking into account overfitting and model parsimony, of course. And in the end, the final model that we will create, which is usually a frequency model, it's not a loss ratio model. So usually we select ESG KPIs in terms of loss ratio, but we create models based on frequency in order to be used within the frequency module of pricing models. The end model usually which is a continuous variable will be further clusterized into a finite number of clusters in order to enhance the monotonic relationship between the score and the risk indicators. Okay, so in the end we will have a score, a discrete score. Usually we have 5 classes, where 1 means more aligned to ESG criteria and 5 means less aligned to ESG criteria. And how do we determine this kind of 1 to 5? Because we have chosen ESG indicators which are coherent with this orientation. So you typically companies which will be in class 1 will have low greenhouse gases emissions, will have a high level of inclusivity, will rely on a low percentage of temporary workers, and so on. While instead, by construction, companies inside the bin 5 will instead be highly polluting firms, will rely on a high percentage of temporary workers, will have a lower amount of ISO certifications, and so on. So this will be a proper ESG score. But since we have created it by meshing together ESG indicators which are correlated with loss ratio, we will have as an outcome that this kind of score will also have a correlation. Will also be capable of determining sections of the portfolio of the insurance companies which have a very different risk profile. So we will end up with companies. Typically, we end up with portfolios where those companies which have a score of 1 will have around minus 40% of observed loss ratio with respect to the average of the portfolio. On those companies, of course, since the company can, of course, invest in the sense that can decrease the commercial price or increase the discount in order to make the insurance product more attractive for this kind of companies. On the other side, companies within bin 5 will have an observed loss ratio which is much higher than the portfolio average. And on those companies which are less sustainable and much more riskier, the insurance companies can take actions in order to increase the commercial price or decrease the discount in order to not only improve its loss ratio, but also increase the share of ESG aligned companies. So basically, with the same commercial action, we can obtain 2 very different objectives with just 1 move, as I was saying. So the improvement of the portfolio loss ratio and the increase of the share of ESG aligned companies within the portfolio. I want to conclude this presentation with an example of 2 companies which coming from let's say from a past project, let's say, which show how this kind of ESG score can preserve its interpretability in terms of the individual ESG indicators which we have considered for the creation of the score. So here we take 2 companies which are very similar in terms of size. More or less, they are around 20 million of euros. Company A is active in the development and production of systems for material handling and movement, so basically transport logistics, more or less, while Company B is active in the printing, coating, and processing of metallic metals. Company A has a very good ESG score. Let's say it has a ESG score of 1 due to the fact that this company has low greenhouse gases emissions. They have an ISO certification for the environment. They rely on government aids for energy efficiency improvement. They have health and safety certification. They have a high percentage of full-time employees. They have several patents. They are operating in a low gender pay gap environment. So everything considered, this score is excellent from at least, let's say, from a statistical point of view in terms of sustainability. And indeed, for this kind of company, no claims were found. Of course, this is just an example, of course, but it's very telling, because on the other side, Company B is basically the total opposite of Company A. So very high emission, no certification, low percentage of full-time employees, and so on, with an overall ESG score of 5, so a very bad score. And in the end, at the end of the policy, this kind of company had 4 claims. So a totally different scenario, which correlated very well with the interpretation we gave of our ESG score, stressing the fact that a good corporate citizen is good not only from an environmental point of view, but also from an insurance risk point of view. So, wrapping up our let's say all this presentation that we have let's say seen together. So the learning objectives that we have here, we break down the learning objectives with, let's say, what you should have understood for each of them. So for the first learning objective, you should have understood how open data sources and analytics can provide several statistically significant ESG indicators which can be computed directly from the scanned information available at underwriting. For the second learning objective, you should have understood that since these indicators can be computed on the entire portfolio, they enable a correlation analysis with insurance risk, and experience has shown us that many of such ESG indicators do indeed show such correlation and can be used for further analysis. And finally, for the third learning objective, you should have understood that mixing the best ESG indicators by means of advanced machine learning techniques leads to ESG scores which are useful both for pricing sophistication and for sustainability assessment. And here I thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any question, I'm here to answer them. Thank you very much.
Oh, couldn't get my camera on. Oh, there we are. Hi, Mattia, thank you so much. That was really, really informative. And I think a lot of good detail there. So it looks a bit dark in here. We're not sitting in the dark. Yeah, a lot of good detail there, which I think will hopefully have helped all of our members who have joined in considering this. It doesn't look as though there's any questions in the chat, so people are a little bit shy. I did have a question. So in your experience, do companies give ESG sufficient consideration, do you think, or is it something that people are still learning about?
Thank you very much for the question. So it's improving. The situation is improving. As I was mentioning at the beginning, the level of adequacy of ESG evaluation from the insurance perspective, from insurance company perspective, is increasing because of regulatory pressure, but also, let's say, external pressure, because, let's say, the public eye at the moment is always more demanding in terms of sustainability actions from corporate citizens. So they are starting to adapt and to integrate this kind of information into their processes, actually into their pricing processes, because they have right now insurance companies face the mission to improve their book, basically. So and this is a way on how to make this transition as smooth as possible and as let's say without bloodshed, let's say.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're absolutely right on that, on those points. I don't know why. Does anyone else have another question? I'm just looking here. Doesn't look as though they do, unless I'm missing it. No, I think all people are all a little bit shy, but I mean, we have a copy of this presentation will go out to all attendees, so they'll have your contact details, so that you can contact Mattia if you've got any questions post this session. But just as a reminder for the feedback survey, everybody, if you could take a couple of minutes to complete that, and do also visit the MGA's website for future sessions and events that are coming up. But Mattia, thank you so much for taking the time today to go through that with everybody. I hope that people have gained some really useful tips to take away with them. Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us, for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at another briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.